I have had a few, but when I was 9, this was the 90s. I was home from school sick, and my mom had a doctor's appointment an hour drive away. I expressed that I felt horrible and didn't want to go. I felt bad and wanted to sleep. This was at about noon. My mom gave in mostly because my older brother was going to be home from school in a few hours. She told me not to answer the door for any adults, unless it was family, and it was okay if any of my friends come over to see how I felt. Because friends did that stuff in small town America in the 90s. Anyway, my mom leaves and I do what any kid would do. I jumped on my Super Nintendo. About 15 minutes later, I hear a knock on the door and it's a boy my age. He said he was my mom's friend, Kim's son. We played some games for about 45 minutes to an hour when he was abruptly like, "I go now." I was like cool and let him out. My brother never came home after school and I was left alone. Mom comes home, is pissed at my brother who is still at his friend's house. She asks me if anyone came over. I said no, then was like, "Wait, yay, Josh came over, he said he was Kim's son." Her reply was she didn't know a Kim with a son. Sometime later, we were at Kim's house and I see a picture of Josh and I ask my mom and Kim where Josh is and their faces drop since I knew her son's name. Apparently, Josh died at 8-9 years old, a year before I was born. So it didn't register with my mom that could be who I was talking about because I was never told about him. I was at my friend's place staying in her basement. For a year, she'd complained about weird noises at night and someone calling her name out. I wrote it off as paranoia and regular house sounds. However, around 7 AM, I was woken to consistent knocking. I went to investigate the sound, and when I approached it, it stopped. As I turned to head back into my room, confused, there was an extremely loud bang on the wall beside my head, as if someone had taken their fist and slammed it against the wall next to me. I haven't gone back to the house since. I have a few from the house I grew up in. Our house is enclosed in a fence and we had a giant bell, which guests would pull on a string to ring to let us know they were there. We had a sign telling them to do so. I was probably around 8-9 years old. It was a still day, no wind. It was just my mom and I home alone. One day, the bell rings and I figured it was the neighbor boy I was friends with, so I ran outside pretty quickly, excited for a fun day of hanging out with him. I opened the gate and there was no one there. There could be some explanation. I was a little weirded out because I did zoom out there pretty quickly for someone to have run away. But I was not scared, yet. Then we heard the doorbell ring. This was very unusual because I don't think our doorbell was in working order at the time and no one ever used the doorbell, obviously because they rang the bell at the gate. You guessed it, no one was there. Then we heard a knock on the door and again, no one. I remember just being paralyzed with fear. Then, again just my mom and I. My dad was at an event for the weekend and we were home alone. This was before cell phones, let alone smartphones or smart technology of any kind. We had an old computer which I believe was off. It wasn't used a whole lot at that time and a very old school landline phone. My mom was in the kitchen doing dishes or something when all of a sudden, I hear what I thought was her say, "Hello." But it sounded a little funny, like not quite her. I ask who she's talking to. She promptly freaks out and asks if I heard that. I guess she heard, "Hello? Hey, what's up?" She didn't say hello at all. It was so loud and clear like someone was right there in the room, and so casual too. We did not sleep well that night. I also had climbed into my parents' bed one night for some reason and I swear, I heard whispers and walkie-talkie sounds. It sounded like it was coming from the window at the head of the bed. Both my parents were sound asleep and snoring, so it couldn't have been them. I just laid there too frozen with fear to do anything and eventually went to sleep. The more I think back to it the more freaked out I get and I wish I had woken my parents up and checked it out. I have so many more but that's all I will share for now. Oh, I have lots of these. But the most terrifying one was 8 years ago. I was 19. I was watching TV on the couch, alone at the living room, when I felt someone looking at me. It was that chill that runs up your spine, a suspicion. I looked back and I couldn't believe it. There he was, this huge, very tall shadow man. He seemed to be wearing a hat and he was purely shadow. Pure blackness as he was made out of the void. And I didn't just catch a glimpse of him. As I stared, there he was. Looking at me with no eyes. Trying to seem bigger, scarier than death. Bringing cold weather and loneliness along. My mother was having a rough time. She was very depressed and emotionally unstable. We had been fighting a lot during that time. I could feel he was there for her. He wanted to scare me. I started to pray, though I wasn't religious. Started to ask guardian angels to take him away, to protect me and my house, to take him wherever he needed to go. I couldn't move. I could only pray, for solid 20 minutes, eyes closed, still feeling his presence. Until I could move again. I turned off the TV and carefully went up the stairs. I was afraid of being pushed down. As I was walking up, the whole staircase became involved in a thick odorless fog. I could barely breathe. I started to pray again. Sat on my bed, terrified. The fog dissipated and I lay down to sleep. And soon as I closed my eyes, 3 bright flashlights blew before my eyes. That's when I said, "Fleabit," grabbed my pillow and went into my sister's room. "May I sleep on the floor?" "Sure, why? There are dead people in my room." "Okay." I studied a bit and learned that flashlights are usually benevolent spirits helping us. My sister wasn't fazed because things like that are not old news around here. Everyone in the family is a psychic. My mother, my father, myself, my sister, my cousins, aunts and uncles, 2 of my grandparents. It's a recurring topic of conversation in my family. But I won't lie, this time it was scary as heck. When I was little, I used to sneak into my parents' room at night because they had a TV. This story is the reason I stopped. It was probably around 11:45 to 12:30. The only reason I know this is because my light next to my bed used to turn off automatically after about 4.5 hours of use, so I'd sneak in around then. And I creeped around the hallway with my blanket. I was like 2. Before getting to my parents' bedroom, I thought I heard something going on inside, like uneasy breathing. It was slow, but there was no rhyme or reason to it. I slowly opened the door to see an all-grey woman with messy curly hair, a torn silk dress and beady red eyes. She just stood there, looking down at my mom. I opened the door a little bit more, and it creaked as it moved. Old Victorian, that'll happen, which caused her to slowly look up at me. I slammed the door and ran back to my room before crying myself to sleep under my giant mound of blankets and pillows. I don't remember this part, but when asking my mom about that following day, she said she came in to praise me for sleeping in my room that night. I proceeded to tell her everything, which must have spooked her a little bit because the next thing she did was try and mess me up. She would tell the same story, but change a small aspect. She said every time that I corrected her, it made her believe a little more. I can still remember the woman's beady eyes and tangled curly hair. My wife and I were taking a trip to upstate NY. We stayed at a place called The Hedges. It's a small outdoorsy sort of resort by Blue Mountain Lake. Nice place. One day we were bored and decided to get a board game from one of the buildings that had those things available to whoever wanted to use them. The building was just an old house that guests could just walk in and hang out or whatever. My wife and I walk in and found the games. We picked one up and before we left, decided to have a look around the house. As we approach the kitchen, we both see a dark figure walk across the doorway. It was like a tall man but completely dark like a shadow. We looked at each other and asked if the other had seen it too. We booked it out of there pretty quickly. As we were checking out the next day, we asked the checkout lady if she knows of anything weird/ghostly happening there. She looked at us, seemed to hear what we said, seemed uncomfortable with the question, and then just didn't answer us.